Okay, I think we're ready to go. So thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Becoming Allies, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility. Before I introduce our two speakers, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping topics. So today's webinar will be recorded. We will share a link with you after the webinar in a follow-up email, and you're welcome to revisit the content or share with your friends and colleagues. We also invite your comments and questions. Please look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any time, just type it into the Q&A. I will pose it to our speakers either at that time or hold it for the end of the event. So I'm super excited to introduce our speakers today. We have Carolynn Morris and Susi. So Carolynn is an HR consultant at Go1 and a strategic communication consultant and certified life coach at My Orange Soul. Having studied communications at Utah State University and received her Master's of Strategic Communications at Westminster, Carolynn has gone on to further her career and passion in consulting, speaking, and life coaching. Carolynn is joined today by our guest speaker, Susi, Executive Director at PIK2AR, which stands for Pacific Island Knowledge to Action Resources, a strength-based ecosystem of programs and events. Susi has a unique background. Born in the Kingdom of Tonga, she moved to New Zealand at the age of 5 and graduated high school in Utah, where she was introduced to her ethnic community. She is also an ex-felon and a survivor of domestic and sexual violence. Welcome and thank you, Susi, for joining Carolynn and our audience today to speak on this very important topic of diversity and inclusion. I'll pass it over to you, Carolynn.
Awesome. Shannon, thank you so much for the introduction. Everyone, we are excited to have you. We're excited to be with you. Susi and I are excited to have this conversation together. It is so critical for us to have these types of conversations. And before we kick off into our agenda, where we're going to be talking about inclusion, equity, diversity, and accessibility, Susi's going to invite us to do an activity, and we are really excited to see how this impacts your perspective and your experience. So Susi, please talk to us a little bit about our activity.
Thank you, Carolynn. So I want everyone to give yourself a grade mentally in how you grade yourself about inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And I want you, as you're writing your grade down, I want you to think about if one of these items higher in one area or the other. If you can, write down your grade, A, B, C, D, F, but withdrawal is not applicable here in this sense. And then we'll come back to it before at the end of our discussion. So everybody got their grade written down?
Awesome. Great. Super pumped about this. So then we're going to jump into our conversation about inclusion. And Susi, inclusion is it can sometimes be an ambiguous word. And how can we create spaces that are safe and brave? And what is inclusion at its finest? What does that look like?
I think we just talked about that. If we take that analogy that diversity is about being invited to a party, then inclusion is about being asked to dance. Making the space comfortable so that it's a brave space, people can make mistakes, to have authentic conversation.
And so going off that, so many times there have been conversations that I've wanted to have, but I'm doing these mental acrobatics of, is this okay? Is this not okay? How can we avoid those mental acrobatics?
We really have to be kind to each other, and we have to allow people to make mistakes. We all make mistakes in this space. I also believe that the conversation needs to start when you have that question. And there is nothing wrong with asking, well, can you define that question? What did you mean? And not to take offense to it, but to lean in with curiosity and to educate each other about whatever the conversation is. The problem is when we do these mental acrobats, that's when the politically correct question comes out. What does that do for us? When the question came, we should be able to live in a society where we can ask that question, because then we're going to get an authentic answer back that's going to educate each of us and move this conversation forward.
And I totally appreciate that, because there's been times where I've done the mental acrobatics of, is this appropriate? Is this a good time? And maybe like sometimes it's not a good time, but circling back to it and saying, Susie, I wanted to circle back to this conversation and it just wasn't a good time with other things that are going on. I'm so curious as to what this means to you. And I'm so curious as to how this impacts you in this capacity. And so being brave enough to recognize that we can lean in, that we can have those relationships. Because Susie, there's been so many times where I'm like, I don't get what this means. Can you help me out? Or there's times when we've been in meetings with PIK2AR and everybody's laughing and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know what just happened. And you'll lean over and be like, oh, Carolyn, this is what we're talking about. And then you include me, you're bringing me in. And that makes me feel so grateful that you're willing to do that, because I'm sitting there in deer in headlights of, I don't get what just happened.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, like, I'm very, in meetings, I will say, use the word white. And I always don't know whether, like, it's a descriptive, it's not a negative, right? When we say these kinds of things. I mean, I do also want to say that we have to acknowledge that some of these things that we do ignorantly does not give us the pass to say that it's okay. We still have to acknowledge that what we said was not the impact that it had. And so we want to have these conversations, but we also want to say, I acknowledge that what I said was really hurtful to you. I didn't mean it, but that doesn't give us a pass or an out for being hurtful to other people. And I think that process also is part of that, building that relationship, in understanding brave spaces, making sure that it's a safe space for people. But yeah, when we have these conversations, we don't get a pass just because we're having it. And I think some people believe that, is that I'm trying to learn here, so I get to say whatever I want, regardless of how you feel. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So how do you bridge that gap of, I want to say this and it may not be politically correct, and this may come across, unbeknownst to me, hurtful. What would be some strategies that you would suggest for our audience members and for me too? How can we bridge that gap of, okay, this may not be politically correct, I'm not sure how this will come across. How can we do that?
I think authentically, just how you did. Don't do the mental acrobats, right? Just say it. I know this may sound weird. I don't even know if this is right or wrong. And I apologize ahead of time if this is hurtful to you, but if it is, can you explain to me why? Because I really want to know this. We have to stop with the mental acrobats. Say, be brave. Say, I don't know, but I feel like I want to ask this question. Mm-hmm. And I apologize if this is hurtful to you, but I really don't know.
Yeah. And owning that we don't know, I think, is a critical component of that, of, I genuinely don't know. Can you help me with this? Can you help me understand why this is hurtful? Can you help me understand why this is uncomfortable? And prefacing that of, I don't know, how much more compassion will we have when someone asks a question when they genuinely don't know? There's so many things I genuinely don't know. And thank you, Susie. That's huge. And I mean, we really can't learn something from everyone. And that's the beautiful part. If we lean in with that authentic curiosity, that's going to be transformative for our conversations of inclusion and inviting people to the dance and inviting people to participate and extending those safe and brave places. I really appreciate that perspective, Susie. And so with that, I want to jump into diversity, because diversity is a really hot topic right now. And in your profession and in your experience, what is diversity, and how can we really explore other resources if we don't understand what diversity really is?
I think underneath all of diversity, isn't it that we're looking for diversity of thought? Isn't that really what we're looking for? And so I think in the business world is that diversity in thought drives innovation, and then innovation drives products and services, which then affect the bottom line. And so when corporations and HR people come to me and say, how do we increase our diversity in our candidate pool, right? I talk to HR people and say, isn't what you're really looking for is people that have difference of thoughts? Because you can line up 5 people of color from my own ethnic race, we're all not going to think the same. I mean, I think that's a fallacy, right? I mean, you're not going to line up 5 people from any group or 5 people in all groups. None of us would think the same, but I underneath all of that, I believe people don't understand that really what they're asking for is they're looking for a diversity of thought. And how do we hire people that have diversity in thought? How do we make sure that that's how our companies and our organizations are always looking for that? I think to increase the diversity in like the candidate pool is that you have to increase the diversity of people that you interview. And then ultimately that translates to having more diverse people in the workplace. But again, I keep going back to, it's not diversity in color. It's not diversity in all of these other things, right? What we're really going for is diversity of thought. Because thought is what propels innovation. Does that make sense?
Totally agree. And as you were talking about like having 5 different people, I'm even in my own family, between my siblings and I, we are wildly different in experience, in expectations of life, in ambitions, in thought process, in education, everything. We are very, very different. And so I appreciate that it's a diversity of thought. And the only way that we can actually explore a different way of thinking is looking in different places than where we've been before. So if we're expecting a different result, we need to act differently. That's like the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing expecting a different result. Like, that's not reality. We have to look at different life experiences. We need to check ourselves with our own biases. And so what are some ways and tactics and strategies that we can check our own biases, Susie? What does that look like?
I'm going to take a step back and just say that diversity starts with each one of us on the inside, right? Taking that check. I mean, I'm going to say that if companies do not have a diversity vision, they need to get one, right? They need to, when companies ask me to take a look at their structure, I say, where are you in your board of directors? Where are you in your executive team? In your management? Don't try to work on the outside in, work on the inside out. Once you start aligning those things, if you don't have a diversity statement or vision of your company, really are you about it? And so these are some of the conversations when we start talking about diversity. Is we're always good about how do we diversify our programming? How do we get diverse people to come? The truth is, look inside first. Look at how we act and how we are. You start today. First thing you can do is have conversations with people that don't look like you, if you have to start that way. I always, when I look at a table and I sit down to work on a project, I'll say, who's missing at this table? Do we all got blonde hair? Do we all live on the west side of town? Right? Do we all, and so you've got to look at these things. And then today, I challenge everybody at lunchtime today, have a conversation with somebody you don't know that's opposite than you, that you think is opposite. And I want you to come away with 2 commonalities from that conversation. Because what you're going to find out is that you probably have more in common than when you were doing these mind acrobats of who you were going to choose. Because we usually want to choose and be with people that look like us, have some commonalities with us. Be brave today. Step out, have a conversation with somebody, and come away with 2 commonalities. And if you will train yourself to do that every day, you will find that you will have an amazing group of friends that you've made, but also your experience and your perspective on things will have grown and increased that will translate over to your life in your different areas. So that would be my first one.
And that's beautiful, because so often we go to what's comfortable or what we perceive to be comfortable. And the more we get to know people who look different or who are different than us, the more we're going to realize that we have a lot more in common than we do differences. There may be culture codes that we need to switch. There may be certain things like that. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to have a safe environment. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to have that human connection and that soul-to-soul experience with another person. And how do we create that? And I appreciate that it's check your freaking biases. Get out of your head. Get out of the mental acrobats. It's going to do nothing but cripple connection and creating this inclusive experience. And Susie and I, we came up with a question for everybody. So we want you to put your responses in the chat or in the Q&A. And this is our question, because it's going to be different for everybody. What do you think of when you hear the word fat? Go ahead and place your answers in our Q&A. And
you're not going to hurt my feelings by any means, because I'm good with it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And then Shannon is going to share some of these with us. And Susie and I, we're going to unpack a little bit more about what these biases can translate into and how we can actually all work together to create a different lens and a different perspective in life. So we'll give you guys about 10, 15 more seconds in that capacity, and we'll definitely start unpacking those in about 10 seconds.
That's why we're giving the 10 seconds. I was going to say that implicit bias is not racism, right? We are born, we are hardwired with implicit biases. I think the idea is to recognize them in the work that we do and work through them.
Yeah. And that's so helpful, because we are creating this safe space where we can share what we really think when we hear the word fat. And this is going to be awesome for us to unpack together and offer different perspectives and different lenses. So Shannon, would you mind sharing a few of those with us?
Yeah, so we have some really good ones. We have body shaming, curves, judged, larger, big and good, unhealthy, prosperity, obese, label, not valued, food content, self-conscious, big. So those are just a few that stand out.
Beautiful.
Some really good ones in here.
Awesome, Shannon. Thank you. And thank you everyone for participating in that capacity. Susie, let's unpack this a little bit, because there are definitely cultural norms.
Can I ask somebody, just like, how are you feeling about putting that information in the chat? Did it make you feel a little uncomfortable? Did you find yourself doing mental acrobats of what you should put there? So I want you just to be conscious about this little activity. That's your mental acrobats that's working in your brain there. Go ahead, Carolyn, sorry.
No, that's beautiful, because that illustrates the point of, oh, am I going to be politically correct? When literally we just asked, what do you think when you hear the word fat? And what is your experience and what is your perspective? And so Susie, let's unpack that a little bit. Let's unpack like the mental acrobatics that people went through. And I mean, some people are like, am I wrong for thinking that? This is uncomfortable. This is something totally new and different. So help us unpack that activity a little bit.
Well, I mean, your first thing is, I bet you many were thinking, can somebody see what my name is? Can somebody tell who I am? if I write this answer.
Mm-hmm.
It feel very, very vulnerable to answer questions like that. So I think that's one of the first things. That's one of the first mental acrobats we go through is who's gonna know? Who else is gonna see my answer? And that the idea is, what are other people going to think about us? And then, oh, I wonder how everybody else thinks about this. You know, in the culture that I come from, that means that your family had enough money to feed you. And so I have many conversations. I have a friend who is white American, and she dated a Polynesian in college, and she's a runner. And his mother came from Tonga and told her, you can't marry my son because you're sick. I can see your ribs. There's something wrong with you. And every time the mother would come to visit, she would pull her aside and say, you can't marry, something's wrong with you. And she said, oh, I run, I'm barely, and she said, no, I can see your bones, and that's not healthy. And I want my grandchildren to be healthy, and you can't marry my son. And so a very different perspective, right? Is that definition of what is health.
Yeah. And that goes to show everybody had some mental acrobatics that they just experienced of, well, is this going to be PC? Is this going to be okay? Are they going to see my name? And at the end of the day, it's okay for us to lean into this conversation. This is exactly what we want to do. And so jumping into our next discussion, Susie, let's talk a little bit about equity, because so many people get equity and equality kind of interchanged, and they're very, very different. Can you unpack what that means? What's the difference between equity and equality?
Equality is when you say, I'm going to give everybody $5, whether you need it or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Equity is saying you need $4 and you need $8 and you don't need anything.
Yeah.
Right? Not everybody needs the same thing in order to be empowered to do what they want to do. And half of the time, it's because we're going to dole out the same to everybody because in our minds, they need to do what we want them to do. And that's what they need to do, right? Instead of saying, equity to me is, what is it that you want to do? And how do you want to get there? Okay, so that's going to be $4. So what do you want to do? Oh, you don't need anything. Okay. And to me, that's the difference. Not every employee needs the same thing. Not every child needs the same thing. If you look at children and your brothers and sisters, everybody needs something different. So it should translate very well into all the other areas of our lives, but for some reason, when we come to this space, some people still are under the thought, oh, we're going to give assistance out to people, all based on the same thing. And I feel like it's a waste of money to do things like that. Mm-hmm. It's not efficient to do things like that. And it's not empowering to people. Right? But if you have that conversation and find out exactly what somebody needs, then it's like your human investment in people.
Agreed. And that goes to show how important it is to have that inclusion with equity. You know what? Maybe someone doesn't want to be on the dance floor, but they want to be on the side. They want to watch everybody. They want to be included in that capacity, because not everybody wants to go do the dance. Some people may want to do refreshments. Some people may want to DJ. Some people may want to, put up the decorations for the dance. How we engage with other people and how we invite them into that inclusion is going to be imperative. I mean, that equity just goes to show that not everybody wants to be on the dance floor. Some people may want to do other things at the dance. And so when we talk about effort is not same across the board, help me understand what that means to you.
I think just if you look at your day, when you go to work, get up in the morning, take a shower, eat some breakfast, jump in your car, go to work. But let's throw in that you don't have a car. You get up to go to work, you have to get up 4 hours ahead, do all of those things. You have to walk to public transportation, get on public transportation, then get off public transportation, walk to your work. The effort to get to the same job was not the same, right?
Yeah.
And so it's realizing that not everybody sees and has the same tools that we have, and that it's okay, right? And that we have to allow for that. Again, we're going to make mistakes. We have to lean in with curiosity. Maybe some people are okay with not having a vehicle. Look, people who live in New York here without vehicles. That would be weird here in Utah, probably, or in other places, you know? And if you think about the effort that it takes for anybody that we work with, the idea that the effort that it took me to get in my car to go someplace is very different than others. And the assumption that we make the same effort, it's just like us, is very hard. I wish there was a way that we could measure effort in many ways. I think that that's a measurement that still needs to be developed in accessing services, accessing employment, accessing jobs. I don't know if there needs to be something about effort, because it's not the same at all.
I completely agree. And something that's so important is to realize that my life experience is not somebody else's. Some people may use public transportation, and some people may use a car, and those efforts are very different. And so, Susie, with the last few minutes that we have together, I want to talk about accessibility, because that's not something that we usually talk about. Why is it that one size does not fit all? And why is it so important for us to be aware of what accessibility is in our organizations, and as well as like our personal lives? How can we be more aware and cognizant of accessibility?
You know, the Field of Dreams, you said, if you build it, they'll come. And you'll see many businesses that have failed with that idea. Just because you build it, people do not come. Government agencies come to me all the time and say, we have these programs, it's free, this, that, nobody's coming to get it. I think right now with COVID is a huge example. Our states in our country have a ton of money. They're wanting people of color and the overlooked communities to come and get the money. But if you don't, and the people that are making the decisions that are so far removed of the people that they're trying to service. So let me repeat that, because I want you to understand that how many steps away are you from the people that you're trying to impact? And are you making decisions for the people that are the furthest away? So the example I'll give is for COVID. They were giving us free masks to give people. The masks, I returned the masks. They were giving us masks that you had to tie behind your ears. Now just think about that process. Somebody's gonna have to be with you to make sure the fit on the mask on your face is correct. Who really is going to tie a mask on both behind their ears every time they put the mask on? Who thought this process through when the people that are the most affected in our area are the people of color? And I said to them, who was the person and how far is this person removed that made the decision that you were going to give people? Are they really going to use it? So just because you have it, just because you give, does not mean that people are going to come and get it. They have to, first of all, it needs to be relevant to them. Why? Why is it good for them? Not why we think it's good for them, but why do they, what's relevant? What is the win for them to participate?
Right.
Yeah, so one size does not fit all. You know, this code switching, I don't know if we have some time, but you know, we code switch, and I want you to think about how we code switch. When we're at work, we act one way. When we're home, some of us act a different way. When we're at church, we act a different way. That code switching, right? And so a lot of times when we talk about accessibility is that people code switch. We want people not to code switch. That's why they don't come and get services. That's why it's not accessible to them, because enough code switching.
Yeah.
So that we make it friendly, we make it inviting. In my line of work, I always say, why do food clinics have to be so ugly and dirty? What does that say? Let's make sure just because you have less money does not mean that you don't deserve quality services, that you don't deserve to have a beautiful place and a beautiful building to come to that's clean, right? But for some reason, so when you ask, that's why people don't come and get services. It's not inviting. It's not relevant. I always say it is people over policy in accessibility.
That's a huge pivot shift, and I really appreciate the discussion about accessibility, because it really is true. It's not a one size fits all. And so our time has come to an end, and Susie, I wanted to thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. The activity that we did on grading yourself on the different pillars that we chatted about, specifically with inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. Do another run through, grade yourself of what, okay, great. This was my baseline. Where do I want to get my grade to? Where do I want to improve? And figure those things out. If you guys have more questions, please feel free to reach out to Susie or myself. This is our direct email, so you will get directly to us. Again, thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure to be with you today. Susie, thank you again so much. It was an honor to be with you today. And we wish you all the best.